This is part 2 of the June 2013 paper. So I've already covered the multiple choice section. Now I'm going to be talking about the second part, which is the section B. As always, it says spend 45 minutes on this section. So if you finish if you're at the end of section A and you've spent half an hour on it and you've still got 1 or 2 questions left, you should just stop, go on to section B, and hopefully at the end of the exam you'll have a couple of minutes left. You can quickly go back to section A and finish it off. But most of the marks come from section B, so you don't want to waste too much time on section A. I'm not going to bother going through the case study. Essentially, it's about a guy that makes jam. You can read it yourself. Remember to always spend a minute or two reading the case study before you get on with the questions. So question 9, explain 2 factors that would affect supply. Right, so because it's the word explain and because it's 6 marks, I know that I'm going to look for knowledge, application and analysis. There's no need for evaluation. Evaluation questions usually come in the last couple of questions at the end of this section. So I've got to think about factors that affect supply. There are many factors that affect supply, but in this specific case, I know one factor that affects supply is the cost of raw materials. If raw materials go up in price, then that means it costs more money for a business to make the product. If costs of making the product go up, that means supply will go down. All I've got to do is link that to the case study. Well, what does he supply? He supplies jam. What are his raw materials? Fruits such as grape juice, blueberries and cranberries. Therefore, if the cost of buying these raw materials, which is grapes, blueberries, cranberries, etc., go up in price, supply will go down. A second point that you could give, I'm just going to randomly choose one. Let's talk about inflation. Inflation is the general increase in the costs of goods and services within an economy. If the inflation rate went up, that means all goods and services within the UK would become more expensive. That means all costs for the business would go up. So petrol costs, electricity costs, rent, raw material costs would all go up if inflation went up. Therefore, if costs go up, supply would go down because of this. So I've explained it, I've linked it to the case study, and I've got myself 6 marks. Let's move on to question 10. Analyze one reason why it might be important to differentiate the business. Right, so I check 4 marks and it's analyze. So again, knowledge, application, analysis for this one. Going to start by giving a definition. Define what differentiate means. Product differentiation means that the business is offering a unique service that sets it apart from its competitors. That could be a high quality service, different products that other businesses don't offer. That could mean using different materials that other businesses don't use. Why do you need to differentiate your business? If you are in a market that is very competitive, then you need to make your product stand out from everyone else's in order to try and maximize your sales. You're trying to stand out and get as many sales as possible. Therefore, you make your product different. You differentiate your product. In this case, let me link it to the case study. Fraser differentiates his business because he offers jam made from fruits that other companies do not. So he has super fruits that other companies do not offer. This therefore differentiates his product and may be more appealing to customers, so they may buy his jam as opposed to someone else's. If you wrote something like that, that's going to get you the full marks. Moving on to 11, assess. Now this is where we start to evaluate at this point. Assess is code for evaluate, plus it's an 8-mark question, and every single 8-mark question is definitely going to involve some sort of evaluation. So assess whether or not having product trials benefit a company such as Superjam. Right, well, let's define. We start with the definition. If you can, you can't always define, but you usually can. Product trials. What's a product trial? Product trials are when a business tests out a product on a small section of the market. They launch a product or service in a small section in order to assess what demand would be. It could involve heavy promotion, particularly where there are already many existing similar brands. So you're testing out your product to see what you think demand would be within the market. Now, saying, should he test out his jam? Well, if you go back to the case study, you would actually see that he's already done that. When he was young, he went door to door. This is application. He went door to door and he asked people if they'd like to try his jam, and he came back the next day or the next week, whenever it was, and asked them if they liked it and would they like to buy some. So he has already done product trials. Product trials have allowed him to see how popular the demand for his jam was. Why would that be useful? We need to move to analysis. Why? Basically, analysis means, why is that point relevant? Well, for a product such as jam, there are many different flavors of jam that you could sell. By doing product trials, he can see which jams are more popular than others. The ones that are not popular, he can stop making, and he can focus on the more popular jams, which would then mean that he will increase his sales, and he will not waste his money. He will not waste production on jams that would not be popular. So it's a way for him to find out what products would be popular versus what ones would not be. Evaluation, because it is assess and it's 8 marks, by doing his product trials with his neighbours, that's not very realistic, because they're people that he knows and they're more likely to be nice to him. He really should have done product trials with people that he doesn't know, because that way he's more likely to get real feedback on that. So that's your evaluation point. Whenever you're talking about product trials, you really should do it with random members of the public and not people you know, because you're probably not going to get an honest answer on that one. Question 12, again, it's assess. Assess the likely value of being a limited company. Let's check the marks. 8 again. So we're going to go knowledge, application, analysis, and evaluation. Let's start by defining, and in this case, it's clear that we should define a limited company. Limited company is one that has limited liability. This means that the debts that the company has are the responsibility of the company and not the personal responsibility of the owner or shareholders. So therefore, that means if you own a limited company, you are not responsible for all of the debts. The business is a legal entity in and of itself. Any debts that the business has are not the same as the debts that you personally have. So if the business goes bankrupt, you lose the money you invested, but you don't have to then pay for all the other debts that the business has. Now, obviously, you don't have to write all of that in the exam. Simply saying that a limited company is one with limited liability, in which the business's debts are not the full responsibility of the owner or shareholders. That's enough. So why would Fraser want to be a limited company? Well, it helps to reduce risk for him, because if he is a limited company, that means that if the business is unsuccessful and it does go bankrupt, he will not be liable to pay all of the debts of the business personally himself. So it does help to reduce risk. Running your own company is a very risky venture, and so anything that would reduce the risk is a really good thing to do. Another positive of being a limited company is that he may be able to encourage investors to invest in the business, because it has limited liability. So investors are more likely to want to invest because they will know, again, that it's less risky for them. The maximum money they could lose is the money that they've invested. They're not going to be responsible for all the debts that the business has. But we have to evaluate. What's a big negative of being a limited company? It's that if you try to get a loan from the bank, they may be less likely to give you a loan compared to someone with unlimited liability. Why? Well, because if you've got unlimited liability, you are personally responsible for all the business's debts. And a bank might think that if you do have unlimited liability, you've got that responsibility on your shoulders, and you're going to be making really sure that you pay back all of your debts, because you don't want to be personally responsible for those debts. Whereas if you've got limited liability, you may not be so careful, so bothered to pay back all of those debts, because you know The debts of the company are not your personal responsibility. So that is a negative point. That's what you could evaluate. Also, by having limited liability, it does also require more paperwork. It is much more complicated to set up. As Fraser is quite a small company, he may not really be bothered about that type of thing. He's also quite young, so he may not really, think about this type of thing at this stage of the game. I think that's one of the points in the case study in the mark scheme. We then move to the final bit, and I've noticed that this is quite a common thing they'll do. The last question is 12 marks, but they usually split it into two. They have a 13A and a 13B. They both require knowledge, application, analysis, and evaluation, but they just split it up into two little sections. So it says, evaluate the extent to which the following might affect Superjam. Right, a rise in the level of unemployment in Scotland. Why is Scotland important? Because that's where the business is based. They do sell products outside of Scotland, but they sell products primarily in the Scottish market. So why would rising unemployment affect Superjam? Well, as you should know, when unemployment goes up, that means consumers in general have less disposable income. If consumers have less disposable income, then demand for products, most products, not all, for most products will go down. Therefore, demand for jam, which is not a necessity, it's more of a normal or luxury good, is likely to go down because of that. So consumers have less money, they stop spending as much money, demand for products that they don't actually need, that are not necessities, will go down, and I would argue that jam is not really a necessity. However, how would we turn that round as an evaluation point? Well, firstly, he may have, because he's the only jam-based company that has superfood jams, superfruits, he has a unique product. So he may have customer loyalty. Customers might really like his jam because it's different to all the other ones. Therefore, they either buy his jam or they can't have superfruits. So they may still buy his product anyway because there is no alternative to it. Secondly, because the jam is not particularly very expensive, even though consumer income's going down, buying jam is not going to take up a huge chunk of someone's income. So people may just still buy it anyway because it's not particularly expensive as a product. It's not really a luxury product, it's more of just a basic product. So for some, it could be a necessity. So that's your evaluation point there. Second one, how would he be affected by an appreciation in the value of the pound? Right, so when we're talking about the pound, an appreciation or depreciation, we are talking about importing and exporting. That's what you should think straight away. So Superjam, why has that got anything to do with imports or exports? Well, we know from the case study that he has those super fruits, and you can't get all those super fruits in the UK, so he's going to have to get them from outside the country. Therefore, Superjam must import jams, or should I say must import fruits from somewhere. Therefore, if the pound gets stronger, that means you are able to afford more imports. You are able to afford to buy more products from abroad. Why is that important? Well, because he can buy more raw materials from abroad at a cheaper price, that means his costs have gone down. What does that do to a business? If a business's costs go down, that means they will supply more at a lower price. So that is how an appreciation in the value of the pound will affect him. However, what's your evaluation point? Well, you've got two evaluation points. If he exports his jam to other countries, it may be more difficult for him because the pound's got more expensive. It makes exporting there's less demand for exports. Therefore, it may be more difficult for him to sell his jam abroad. Secondly, it depends by how much the value of the pound has gone up. If it only went up by 0.1%, it won't really have an effect on his business. If it went up by a lot, 50 or 100%, then it will have a large effect. So that would lead you to the end. That's the end of the paper. And if hopefully by this point you would have a couple of minutes left to either check over your answer or go back and finish off the multiple choice section.